Good morning, everybody, and happy Aloha Friday. Welcome to PSG of Mercer County. The Professional Service Group of Mercer County is a group that is here for you. Anybody that is in any kind of career transition, we do our very best to provide resources, educational opportunities, presentations, all to help make you become more efficient and effective in your own job search. And I wish everyone an Aloha Friday, because I've just been celebrating that for years and years, and I am wearing my Aloha or Hawaiian shirt. And so if you have one, well, you don't have to leave the meeting right now, but you're welcome to wear that anytime you want. This is August 28th. And if there are any Yankee fans on the meeting today, and I suspect there are a few, happy 77th birthday to Lou Piniella. Lou Piniella was an outfielder and first baseman for the Yankees and a manager and a coach, so had a very good career. So it's his birthday today. It's also Ron Guidry's birthday, Louisiana Lightning. He's 70 years old today. So any Yankee fans, maybe if the Yankees are playing tonight, I didn't look to see the schedule, but you can see if they do any sort of celebration for those two great players. Among our resources that we do provide, we do have our LinkedIn group. Our LinkedIn group is called PSG of Mercer County. Hopefully you are all on LinkedIn and building up or have a good profile. And so our LinkedIn group, just look for us, PSG of Mercer County. If you are not yet a member of our group or joined our group, please feel free to do so. It's a little bit of a private group. It's public in that it's easy to find, but it's private in that we always pre-screen people that request to join us or attend the meeting or the group. And by that I mean, I will check our attendance records or people that have joined our recent online meetings. We only want people who are job seekers or supporting job seekers, people like us, as members of our LinkedIn group. And we're trying to keep people out that are just in it to collect names and email addresses. We want to try and minimize kind of the spamming emails that could happen, that sometimes happens from people joining large groups. Our group is quite large with over 1,600 members. They are all job seekers. They've all attended at least one PSG of Mercer County meeting. So there's a good chance as you're using LinkedIn and using it to find a connection at a company or an industry of interest, that if a member of the group is one of your either direct connections through the group or can provide you a connection, that if you contact a member of our group, there's a good chance they will respond to your request. So do absolutely consider joining our LinkedIn group. If for some reason I cannot find your name, or if you are new to PSG of Mercer County, what I will do is just ask you. You can also send us an email to psgofmercercounty@gmail.com. and send an email and say, David just attended the meeting for the first time, put in a request to join the LinkedIn group, just letting you know. And that way it makes it a little easier for me to make sure that I can validate you. So it's just an extra thing you can do. We do also have a website. It's also called PSG of Mercer County. It's psgofmercercounty.org, all one word. It is a big, robust resource for people who are in career search. It is over 120 web pages of content. So it's got a lot of content in our website. So go take a look at it. Maybe a good resource for you. We do have a menu across the top. One of the menu options is called Career Options. That's a great place to start looking for new ideas for job search. We have a section for getting started in the job search process, or maybe you're thinking of not full-time anymore, but working as a consultant. Maybe you're thinking of starting a business or buying a franchise or taking advantage of volunteer opportunities. So it's a great place to start on any of those topics, and you can look at that on our website. We do like to celebrate landings if we can. Last week we had one landing, which was Amy, so we congratulated her. So if you have landed or have some other good news you wish to share, you can post that in the chat for all of us to see. So that's something that you can do. We'd like to, and then a little later when I pick up on that, I will acknowledge it, of course. There have been some landings lately. I wouldn't call this a hot job market, but it's starting to pick up a bit. And I know from the career coaches that I've talked with, they are getting quite busy themselves. A lot of them are. So it's possible we have some landings that we can celebrate. So in just a moment, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Larry, and he'll start his presentation, and I will mute myself. And reminder, I will ask you, please make sure you keep your microphone on mute. The little mic button at the bottom, it's a little circular icon, looks like a microphone. It should be white, not green, and green means it's on. We want to make sure it's off. And I'll be checking every once in a while if I hear any background noise. If for some reason there's a lot of background noise, we can stop the presentation, give me a moment to catch up, turn off the mic, and I can edit that out of the video a little later also. You're welcome to keep your cameras on. Larry will be taking questions during the presentation after each slide. So what he and I will be doing, we'll be looking at chat for any posted questions. And I'll just ask you, as you have a question, write the word question right ahead of the question and then your question, because already there's a lot of chat with information and postings that people are putting that are not question. When I see the word question, it'll allow me to understand right away that's a question you'd like to get answered. So just write question and then your question and put that in chat. And about every slide or two, we'll be taking quick breaks to keep the program as interactive as possible. And there'll be time at the end of the meeting to take questions as well. And once we end the meeting in a little while, I'll keep the session open just for some open networking. That's been pretty successful for the past several weeks that we've done that. People hung around and we just have open discussion, and Larry is welcome to spend time with us as well. So let us get into our meeting right now. So I'm just happy to say that PSG of Mercer County is very pleased to welcome Larry Finkelstein. Larry is the founder and president of Transition Management Associates, TMA, a human resource consulting firm headquartered in Lambertville, New Jersey. And he is an author of And Then I Painted the Garage, a book on how to choose career and run successful job search. TMA provides outplacement consulting to corporate clients and coaches individuals who are seeking employment. Larry's consulted to Fortune 500 organizations, small and medium-sized business, workforce investment boards, high school and college students, welfare clients, and people who are transitioning to retirement. TMA provides TMA provided consulting in career development and mentoring to the New Jersey State Departments of Labor, Education and State, the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, the New Jersey Food Council, and many chambers of commerce and national association. Larry has been certified in a number of career assessment instruments such as Caliper, Occupational Personality Questionnaire, Lifestyles Inventory, Strong Interest Inventory, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and others as well. Larry holds an MAED in counseling from Seton Hall University and a BA in political science from Rutgers University. So PSG of Mercer County is just pleased to welcome Coach Larry Finkelstein.
Gee, seldom have I gotten the title coach. So I'm going to hope that this will not be sounding like me talking to myself for the next hour. So let me tell you a little bit more about my background, because I want to give you examples of part of the reason why I believe what I do believe about career transitions. My first career was as a probation officer in Newark, New Jersey. I got that job by taking a civil service test and did that for 3.5 years. I didn't know when I left college if I wanted to go into law or if I wanted to go into psychology. So I split the middle by doing counseling for the court system. I then went to graduate school in psychology. So I made the decision that I wanted to go more in one direction than the other. That wasn't a big pivot because I had decided that I wanted to sort of run down the middle for a while. Once I became a therapist, I worked in 2 different kinds of situations. One was in an emergency room of a hospital in North Beth, Israel. The other was for Rutgers Medical School. Very different kinds of jobs, even though they're both behavioral health jobs. After doing that for 10 years, I decided I wanted to make a change. I could see that they were changing the way they spent money on our services. Things were going to get much tighter. We had had a wonderful circumstance of almost unlimited training We had freedom to go out into the community and create new kinds of programs. And that was changing. And I thought, how can I use my background of individual and group and family therapy and reaching out to the community and doing educational programs in a different kind of environment? So my transition from full-time behavioral health to consulting took place in a way which I would not normally recommend at this point. I looked up 25 different companies at the back of Training Magazine, got their addresses because there were no emails at that point that were readily available, wrote them, told them my background, and ended up getting 3 interviews and 2 job offers from that process. So that was a direct mailing process that worked for me. Generally not high on my list of things to do, but it did work. So I went to work for a company that did organizational development, which tied into my family therapy and my individual counseling. I was able to work with groups to get them to become more effective. I started to use new assessment instruments. And so I built on my past career on that one. Commute was awful for that job, and decided I needed to make another change, but didn't really think about I was going to do something totally different. I started networking and found out there was something called outplacement. And I had no idea what outplacement was. This was in 1984. But somebody said, well, here, go talk to these people. I got there. There was no job available when I got there. I talked to them about my background, and I had done a little research, but I didn't know a lot, and asked them a question which I thought would be a loaded question, because I had found out they had nobody with a clinical background working in the outplacement office. They had an industrial psychologist. So I said, when people lose their jobs, do you ever find they're really upset? Now, that's a given for anybody who's ever lost their job, but I knew they didn't have anybody specifically that had my background. I'd had this previous year of working on strategic plans and working in business and the mental health, and I combined those two. They created a job for me, and that was a company called Drake B. Morin. And that sort of set me on the road to what I've been doing for the last 36 years. I became much more knowledgeable working for them, went for another company called Finkelstein, which was a small company in Princeton Junction. That gave me a lot of freedom because they thought I was like great because I had come from the biggest outplacement firm. After 3.5 years there, I went to Wright Associates. Wright Management is the biggest career transition firm in the world. I was a vice president there. I oversaw large projects in organizational development and worked with generally mid-level managers to presidents of companies. After a couple of years of working for them, I decided I could do it better. They overcharged for outplacement, sometimes incredibly high fees. I had one client that was a $100,000 fee to help him find a new job. I had also gone through some training with the Covey Leadership Center, and I thought that with my background in mental health and the Covey 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and having worked in outplacement at that point for 8 years, I could create a program which would be more effective and help people get focused, deal with any roadblocks they might have, because most of the outplacement firms are looking for people to put a square peg in a square hole, and really didn't go out of their way to help people who might be overly anxious or depressed about their loss or going through a big change in their life. As part of my background, I'm a licensed professional counselor. I still occasionally do therapy, but most of the time we call it coaching. Because I had created manuals for the work that I did, I decided that I could change one of the manuals into a book. And so working on and doing, I researched 55 different organizations on what they looked for when they were hiring, the personality characteristics, what they presented, resumes, pretty much whatever. And I asked them not only what do you look for when you're hiring, but I also asked them when you got hired, what was the process that you used to getting the job? And this included people like the president of PSE&G, mid-level managers, hourly workers. I worked with unions. So I gathered as much information as I could and put it into it, and then I painted the garage. I did a presentation, I guess about a year ago, to PSG about that book. I was in the middle of a book tour, relatively local book tour, East Coast, which got canceled in March. And we all know why that happened. I've worked with over 120 organizations doing outplacement and several thousand individuals. All my clients who wanted to get a job got a job. There's nothing, they talk about the secret job market and things like that. I never quite understood. It's not secret, it's not hidden. All you have to do is open your eyes and look. But some people get lazy or they fall into old patterns. They get stuck. While I've been doing this work for the last 36 years, I've noticed that some people make big changes. If you are a coder, you might want another job doing coding. But I've also worked with people who said, I'm tired of being a physicist. I want to do something different. And one of them who designed torpedoes ended up getting an MBA and working for a financial organization. So I've seen people who have made big changes. I've been curious about what are all the components when you do a pivot. Part of my curiosity probably comes from my own background. I've changed directions 3 times in significant ways, and yet there's a core of what I do that's existent in each of my jobs. It's always been listening to people, finding out what their issues are, helping them get the education and understanding that they need to take more control over their own life, and then getting out of their way. So when I did therapy, my goal was always to do it in the least amount of time to help somebody meet their goals and then leave, not have them come to therapy for years and years. And working with career counseling, my goal is always get the best job match possible, teach my client what they need to do, and then be standing in the background there available to them, but not necessarily on top of them saying, oh, you need to do this, this, and this. So I really hope that in most cases, I can help this person become their own career coach. One of the other things that sort of triggered this is that in the middle of my childhood, my father changed careers. He had owned a bar and had a small building in North New Jersey. And he realized that there were people who spent a lot of time at his bar who worked in civil service. Sheriff's Department, the prosecutor's office. And so he'd be on his feet working 60, 70 hours a week. And there'd be people sitting there for hours at a time. And he thought, well, if he's going to have to earn a living for his family, which is his chief priority, and he could spend more time with them if he got a civil service job. So he went from being a bartender to deputy sheriff in North New Jersey. He did it motivated by family concerns. He wanted to spend more time with his kids and his wife, and that's what triggered that. So that's sort of like the background. I've changed positions. My father changed total direction in his career, and I've always been curious about how people do that.
Mike does have a question. What initiates a change in career? It sounds like the quote unquote 7-year itch.
I don't think so, because when I took the job as a probation officer, I knew that was going to be something that was going to be relatively short term. My plan was to either go to law school or to go to graduate school in psychology. And it was how much education and experience in the world that I need before I made a decision. So as a probation officer, I had access to both. I spoke to attorneys all the time, and I did best interests of child investigations. The more I worked in that area, the more I was leaning towards helping people as far as being a therapist versus going to law school. So that was 3.5 years. When I left Rutgers Medical School, I left because the environment had changed significantly. It went from a place that was very open to creativity to a lockdown on what we could do. Our number of hours working with face-to-face clients versus consultation education got cut back. Our training got cut back. And my feeling was not that I was leaving behavioral health, but I was going to use it in a new way. So I didn't really feel that I wanted to leave it as I wanted to morph it into something else. And if it was the 7-year itch, then I started Transition Management Associates in 1992 and have been very happy with it since then. So for some people, I am sure, and I will go into some examples where they did something for a period of time and then when it was time to move on, they've done that many times. But often that's not a pivot. They just simply go, I've worked with this company for 5 years, it's time to move on. Millennials seem to have a greater need to make changes more quickly, in part because of the way the environment and corporations has changed. Moving up over a long period of time in a corporation is less likely than it used to be. So people jump from one to the next and sometimes back. So I think that's for pretty practical reasons. Hope that answered the question. So
Very
people
good.
pivot. Go ahead.
No, very good. Let's
Okay.
move on.
Okay, so people pivot for a lot of reasons. One is they mature. I knew somebody who worked in a healthcare, a health club, and he had done it for a number of years, and he liked hanging out in an almost bar-like experience, flirting with everybody, having very little rent to pay. He was living at home with his family, and at a certain period of time, he matured. He decided, I mean, the guy had a master's degree. He had been a world-class athlete. His focus had never been on seriously growing up. And at the age of about 30, he met somebody, he got married. He stopped working in the health club, got a job which was a little bit more secure. I've seen lots of people who in their mid to late 20s, having first gone into an occupation because it was sort of fun, decided that they want more out of life. And so they started to change what they wanted to do. People pivot because of education. They may be going to night school. There was a mayor of Newark who took 8 years to get his engineering degree. While he was in school, he was also working a job that had nothing to do with engineering. He did well. His firm started to get bigger contracts. He started to get involved in politics and decided that he would shift into trying to avoid going to jail like many of Newark's mayors do. Health. People pivot because of health. And athletes, they can't do things anymore. In nursing, I do a lot of work as far as organization development with healthcare. Lots of nurses, their backs go out, or their knees go out, or their shoulders go out because they've been lifting patients for the last 15 or 20 years. And so they can no longer do what they used to do. I have a number of nurses I've worked with who have gone into medical sales because they couldn't do the job anymore. Burnout is another reason. Sometimes people just have too much stress in the position they've had, too many changes, too many demands. They're in sales and the quota that they're given keeps increasing and their resources don't. Family circumstances. Um, People have kids. They want to spend more time with their children. They leave the workforce because they're raising children. They go back into the workforce because the children are older. They have to change their circumstances because they have elderly parents that need help. So there are many family circumstances that will cause somebody to change direction. I believe that my father changed from being a bartender and bar owner to being deputy sheriff because his father had abandoned the family when he was 12 years old. For him, it was very important to be supportive of his family and be the person his father wasn't. And so he took a job which was intellectually certainly beneath his genius IQ because it gave him a lot of time to spend with his family. People change because of work experiences. I did a program with what's now Kraft, was Nabisco many years ago, and it was a management development program where we worked with 100 people, did a 2-day workshop with everyone about understanding their strengths and how they wanted to use them, and what was their plan for moving ahead within Nabisco itself. And Nabisco had said, if people want to change direction and they have a good case for it, please have them come to us. And so about 20 of the people out of the 100 actually shifted what they were doing. In most cases, it was an issue of changing department. People would go from marketing to finance or human resources and operations. But what they did was they looked at their work experience and where was it satisfying and where were they no longer a good fit. Generally, when you get a new job, when you first start it, you should be a really good fit because the people who are choosing you are matching you to some idea in their heads about what's required. The longer you are in a job, the more likely it is there could be an issue of fit. For one example, I worked with somebody as a partner in my firm for 20 some years. Before I met her, she worked for Right Management, and the first person who hired her loved her. The second person who was her supervisor liked her. The third was sort of mediocre with her. The fourth one liked her a lot, and the fifth one fired her. And it wasn't because that she changed that much and what she did, but there was a bad match with the person who was running the organization at that point. So she then went from working in a big company to working with me, which is very small. People change because personal crises. Something happens and it just to disrupt their life. And at that point, and this is often the case, people make changes because of an external issue, not necessarily because of a developmental issue in themselves. So those are the individual reasons that people tend to pivot to make a big change. Then the other side of this is the opportunities and the dislocations that take place. So when I started to do outplacement, there were people who were in MIS at that time, that's what they called it, and they had worked with mainframes, were used to bigger computers. People were getting PCs in corporate America. They didn't adjust quickly enough. And the managers who had not kept up with the work that was required, their technical skills sort of fell behind, suddenly found themselves looking for new work and new jobs. And many of them had to change direction. So opportunities open up and people will pivot because they see the opportunity as a good match for themselves. There are new jobs and new industries opening up all the time. If you look at, and I'm sure you've heard this, that if you look at the Fortune 500 from 35 years ago, half those companies don't exist anymore. Many of the jobs that exist in the ONET, the Federal Department of Labor's listing of jobs, didn't exist 35 years ago. And some jobs are disappearing. So I've worked with people in the last year who were in the garment industry. and many of the jobs have either gone overseas or disappeared totally because of technological change. So you have all the individual reasons why people want to pivot, and you have the macroeconomic issues and industry issues about why people may be forced to. Any questions?
Yeah, thanks. So Frank has a question. Are some careers better suited to changing or pivoting? A physicist who is analytical can make an easy transition to the financial markets.
Well, obviously, well, we'll get to this, but the bigger the change, the more difficult it tends to be. So if you are in an industry, you have a lot of industry knowledge, and you develop some skills and interests in another occupation within the industry, that change tends to be a little bit easier than if you said, oh, I want to change the function of what I do and the industry at the same time. So when I went from being a probation officer to a therapist to a HR consultant specializing in careers, the industry knowledge had to be gained, and some of that was picked up by books. But the function of what I did didn't really change that much. So yes, somebody who's very analytical can tend to be better at other analytical jobs. And that's why I always look at people's strengths. What strengths and skills did somebody have, and how are they transferable? One of the things I do is help people see where those transferable skills can fit and what jobs are available in a field which they'll find, to their liking. That answer.
Frank has another question. Are late career pivots more difficult or often even impossible? When does one realize that a pivot may not be realistic?
Well, if you wanted to be a basketball player and you can't jump anymore, that would be impossible. The more people tend to be more flexible when they're younger. So there are two sides to this. One is how you're perceived. The other is how you perceive yourself and what you're capable of doing. The slide that I have right now. Some people prefer stability. Some people prefer change. The longer you tend to do something, the harder it is generally to change direction. So it's sort of a social economic inertia. If you've been doing one job for 35 years, especially the kind of job is important. In doing corporate outplacement, I've met a lot of people who had technical skills who said, well, I'm going to be a consultant. I don't want to work for a company again that can fire me. And so part of it is an educational process of me explaining to them that when you're clients, they can all fire you at any moment. But also that if you have fit into a large corporation and you're used to being part of a structure, and then you're going to expect yourself to be self-employed, where there may not be any structure and you have to do everything on your own, especially when somebody has been in a management position. That's a tough change. So I usually tell people in a corporation, if you want to be self-employed and be a consultant or starting your own business, how have you handled being in the large corporation? If you really fit in well and liked everything, but now you've been displaced, that's probably a bad indicator of being self-employed in the future, because you didn't have that drive, you didn't have that in the background. I've worked with people who have worked in big corporations who've had a dream of running their own for a long period of time. And when they've had that dream, that motivation has been there. They tend to have chafed at some of the structure in a big company. They want to make up their own rules, and they tend to be a good fit. So to sum all that up, when you get to a certain age, and it's different for each industry, it's harder to get hired in a regular corporate type of job. The more you're a knowledge worker, the more you can show that you have value with your knowledge, the more likely it is that you can make a big change. But I said, some people want stability, And when you're in your 20s and you don't own a home, and maybe you're not married, and you don't have kids to take care of, making a change has different consequences than if you're in your mid-40s. I worked with somebody who worked for a very well-known organization, not local, so Trader Joe's. And he had worked there for 30 years at that point. I guess he was from the very beginning of the organization. He was talking about making a change. He couldn't make the change without disrupting his life economically. He actually waited for his kids to graduate from college so that he could feel like he had a little bit more flexibility. So, yeah, the older, if you're 50, changing jobs may not be too difficult direction. If you're 65, it becomes much more difficult. If you're 72 and you wanted to change direction, you better be doing it all on your own, because people just don't want to touch you at that point.
Great, thanks. Yeah, let's move on.
All right. So, transitions are sometimes quite difficult, sometimes mildly difficult, but there's a lot of change that's going on. So if you want to pivot, you have to figure out, why is it that you want to pivot now, and what do you want to go to? What's going on with you emotionally? Are you fleeing something, or are you moving towards something? Where is your flexibility? Generally, when you change industries and functions, you're not going to get more money unless it's, well, once again, I do a lot of work with healthcare people. So I've had people who were working as nurses or phlebotomists, had experience working in the hospital, but had a strong sales motivation, and they were able to increase their incomes. I've had nurses who went from working in a hospital to working for a drug company, moved up quickly. One of the people I worked with years ago went from being a nurse to being a director at Merck, and when she retired, she was making $250,000 a year. So you have to look at, where are you? What does the transition mean to you? If you've lost a job, are you being motivated by anger, that you just don't want to have anybody telling you what you can do? What are the opportunities that you see? What industries that are growing can you fit into? What does the transition mean to the other people in your family? If you make a big change, you are probably putting yourself at some risk initially that would not have taken place if you went into another job similar to the one you left. So if you're making a pivot, what effect will that have on your spouse, significant other, your children, your parents? What are these factors that are putting some stress on you? What kinds of resources do you have? I am sure that from what I know of PSG, the majority of you are not working right now. You're looking to move into something new. You probably are deeply motivated by paying your bills. What kinds of resources do you have to make a change? In some cases, you need to get more education and training. Do you have the money to do that? Can you, at this point in your life, become an intern with somebody to show that you have the ability to fit in? Or is that just too much of an economic risk for you? You want to take the positives from the past. You want to look at the skills and accomplishments that you have, and then you want to match them to the opportunities that exist out there. One of the things I tell people to do if they are thinking about doing a big pivot is to collect, you can use Indeed, collect job descriptions of the jobs that you think you would most like to have, and then break down the job description with your past. Where do you match up to some of the things they're looking for? Before we actually started today, somebody said HR tells them, well, if you're a 50% match with a job, don't rule it out, apply for it. I think the rule of thumb that we've used for a long period of time is usually 70 to 75% of a match, depending on what it is in the job description they're mentioning needs to be done. I mean, if they're looking for an MD and you don't have an MD, you're not going to get the job. But if they say they want a CPA and you read the job description and you know enough about finance to know they don't need a CPA, sometimes when people put job descriptions together, it's a wish list. It's not necessarily what they actually need. I do behavioral job descriptions with companies. And sometimes when I interview them to see what should go into the description, they're throwing out all sorts of crap. I mean, they're saying, oh, the perfect person will be the following things. They don't need the perfect person. They need a good person. And sometimes we change the job descriptions. So if there's some wiggle room, you should go for it, especially in this environment where there's so much turmoil. There are jobs that are opening up every day, and there are people who are being furloughed and not being called back every day. So I would look at all these things that are affecting you at this point and making a transition and focusing on what you can take into the future that will be positive for you, and work on letting go of the negatives, one of which is depression sometimes, one is anger. The more you feel negative emotions, the more they negatively affect how people see you. David?
Okay, there's a question from Frank. The MacArthur Foundation has said that our higher educational institutions need to be preparing incoming freshmen for careers when they graduate that do not even exist today. That sounds funny. How does an experienced late career professional prepare or gain the right skills for the ever-changing marketplace?
That would depend on what you're interested in and what your background is in. If you say it that generically, I don't have an answer for that generic a question. If you're saying, let's say you're in your early 50s and you've had a few jobs that you were pretty successful in, and you think that your industry is changing, you're going to want to match up. What do you think is growing? You read the newspaper, you see, if you're in the Princeton area, you can see which companies are opening, which ones are moving, which ones are closing. You look at projections in the newspaper in the business section about what seems to be going on in the world, and then you match with your background and your motivation, and then you can see if there's something that's available that you can get training in. The Department of Labor in New Jersey has funds, limited, but has funds to provide training to people. I worked in a program at Fairleigh Dickinson where I consulted on green jobs several years ago, and the state actually paid for the people to go through the program. But if it's generic, I don't know how to answer that. It really is what motivates you. The county colleges should be focused on training people in workplace skills. Votex do a pretty good job. I've consulted to a lot of Votex, and they tend to be very focused on what is a growing field, where could a kid get a good education that will lead to a good paying job. If you're older, like I said, I mean, you're on your own when it comes to being motivated. There are lots of resources to see what's growing or not growing.
Great.
Okay?
Thank you. Yep. Thank you.
So, all job searches are stressful because of the following reasons. Your family will be affected by it. The bigger the change, the bigger the pivot, the more there's going to be uncertainty about all of these issues. How you fit in with a new organization in a new career. Most people are a little bit concerned about square peg, square hole kinds of jobs. You did it somewhere, you're going to do it the same job basically in the next place. You still be meeting new people. You still need to make a good impression. The bigger, like I said, the bigger the pivot, the more likely it is that you're going to be a little bit insecure about this. So you need to really do your homework and understanding what people will be looking for. The language that you use if you do a pivot. A lot of people use jargon in their resumes, often too much. If you know that your resume is an IT resume and the only people in the world who are ever going to see it are people who know what Python is and all of the terms that are specific to your field, then you can take the opportunity to create a resume like that. But for the most part, resumes need to be future oriented. And so you're going to have to take what you did in the past and make your value understandable to your next employer. And so the bigger the pivot you have to make, the more you're going to have to be creative about that. You're going to have to learn the language that people use. When I made the shift from behavioral health to working in a HR consulting firm, one of the things that was useful for me was that I had studied existentialist psychotherapy. It doesn't sound like psychotherapy as much as it does business coaching. And so I didn't sound as much as a therapist as I might have, even though it was still a problem at times. So if you're going to make a big pivot, your resume is going to have to look like what they're looking for in the new field. Your initial discussions are going to have to explain why you're making the pivot. And we do this all the time, but you have to be prepared to do it. They're going to say, why? They usually don't say, well, why do you want a new job in HR if you've been in HR? They may say, why do you want to work for us? But you're going to have to answer the question, why are you going from marketing to HR? That's going to be something that you have to prepare for. During the interviewing, your examples, the accomplishments that you talk about have to be in the framework of the people that you're talking to then, not where you were prior to this. In negotiating, you may not be in as strong a position if you're starting something new than if you're continuing what you had been doing. And in all job searches, you need to be prepared to be rejected. Most people do not get the first job that they apply for. If you prepare your job search well, then you'll have fewer rejections, but you need to be open for rejection so you can get to the yes. If you're making a pivot, there are going to be even more people who are going to question why you're doing it. And so the regular level of rejection may even be increased until you get the next job. Questions?
Not at this time.
Right. So you have to deal with your own self-image. What do you see yourself as a professional? If you're going to pivot, it means that you now have to see yourself in a way that was different than all of the feedback you were getting in the past, unless they said you were a bad fit for your previous job. So you have to decide, how do you see yourself? I do a lot of assessment with my clients. I use the caliper profile with some of them as far as their personality attributes. I look at how their accomplishments can be reframed. I look at, were they a good fit? I've had people who have stayed in the same industry but were a bad fit for a particular role, and so they changed the role and they were fine. In some cases, people are a bad fit for their entire function. Most salespeople aren't very good salespeople. There's enough research that shows that the top 20% of salespeople provide the great majority of the good sales to their companies. The rest of the people sort of get by, and many of them just don't do that especially well. So, like I said, the bigger the change, the bigger the challenge. You're going to look at different culture. You may be thinking in terms of, if I'm going to change, I may have to change location. If you change industry, they're going to have questions about why and questions about function. So people have stereotypes. They have expectations of how we are as individuals and what certain jobs mean. And you're going to have to translate your motivation in a way that other people can understand. People do it all the time, but you just need to be prepared to do it. Question?
Nope, not now.
Okay. So if you want to change careers, some organizations will make it easy for you. Some of them have no interest in helping you at all because it's not in their best interest. So this takes work. It takes preparation. If you are in an industry that is shutting down, like clothing, so that unless you live in Singapore, you may not be able to do the job that you did 5 years ago. You need to have an open mind. I suggest that people who are thinking about changing direction look at the ONET and New Jersey Career Navigator and look at your interest inventory, which you can take for free on either of them, and then combine what you've learned from your interest inventory with the job options that they mention that seem to match your interests. So that's a way of doing something without any cost to you that can give you a lot of information. You need some patience to go through the job descriptions to consider, are you a good match for this? Informational interviewing is really important if you're talking about changing direction. You need to understand what it is that you think you want to go into. Sometimes we don't really understand what goes into a job if we haven't had it. And so what may sound attractive to you initially, once you learn about it, you'll say, no, that's got the same problems that I'm just dealing with, and I didn't want to keep doing them. Or that's not something I'm prepared to do. It's too much of a change. So if you do informational interviewing and you use the ONET, you can do a lot of research, and then you can see what engages you. Why is it that something seems to be so attractive to you at this point? And once again, I always try to make the distinction between leaving something because it was a problem to you and moving towards something because it's really attractive to you. And if you're just fleeing something, it's harder to make sure that you're going to be a good match for the next one. Once you look at what engages you, then you need to break it down into doable steps. So if something needs some education, are you prepared to go back to school to get that education or take on, LinkedIn has hundreds, I guess, of online training programs, and they're available from county colleges and universities, and everybody's doing things online. And so if you are presently unemployed, this is a good time to both think about what you want to do and take advantage of getting further education if you want to make a shift. You need to understand what's unique about you. Why is it that you would be attracted to somebody else? This continues to change throughout our lives. What made you unique at 25 may not be what makes you unique at 50. I always tell people you're going to sell what you have, which is most attractive at this time. So if you're 25, I might say you're going to push your energy, your enthusiasm, the fact that your education is totally up to date. If you're 50, you're selling your wisdom and experience and whatever else you have going for you. But you're going to focus on different things. You need to be able to reframe all the time. Whatever it is that you've done in the past, you need to be able to take it and using the language and the imagery of people that you want to work with next, you need to be able to put that information and their language in a way that sells you. Reframing is a common thing to do in psychotherapy. So when somebody first mentioned it to me, like, oh, well, you just call it something else. Yeah, you do that all the time in therapy. And it can change the way you see yourself and how other people see you too. And so you need to understand the language of the people that you're talking to. So before I did a strategic plan, I read a book on operations, I read a book on marketing, I read a book on finance and auditing, labor relations, because I was afraid if I was going to go in on a new job, I would be very vulnerable in talking to them and really not knowing what I was talking about. So I learned at least enough initially to fake it. And then while I did it, I kept learning. It's the same thing with when I started to do career counseling, my knowledge of most careers was very limited. So I would talk to my clients and find out from them. And so each client I've spoken to over the last 36 years has educated me further into what they do, how they do it, what's good for them, what's a problem to them at work. And by continuing to adjust, it makes me a better consultant. I learned through other people's pain that when you make a decision about taking a job or going into a new career, you need to align how you feel about it with what you think about it. And if you do that, that gives you a lot of security, aligning heart and head. I also know that anytime I've worked with anybody in 36 years, there's never been a situation where somebody took a job, but their gut reaction was, maybe this isn't right for me, but I think I should take it. I have never seen anybody where it worked out. So you really need to have that alignment between thinking it through and thinking it's good for you and feeling it's good for you. And that's one of the ways of measuring if your proposed change of a career is going to make sense for you. Next, any questions?
Yes, there are. Julie is just asking, where or what are the two places one can take the interest survey you mentioned?
Oh, the New Jersey Career Navigator site, which is part of the New Jersey Department of Labor. The ONET, which is the Federal Department of Labor's website. And they each have very similar interest inventories that are based on a psychologist named Holland. He came up with his process in 1973, I believe. So it'll take 15 to 20 minutes, and they'll ask you, do you like these following ideas, issues, activities? And then it breaks it down into, there's 6 categories that they look at that can be used to understand all careers. You get a 3-letter combination based on whatever you filled out. And then you go to the listings that they have there, and you match your letters. So for example, my strongest interests are artistic and social. And so most of the jobs that I would consider of interest to me would have an A and an S at the beginning. They might be S and A. The third interest I have is entrepreneurial. But there are other interests. Some people, their number one interest is investigating things and how they happen. Some people, their strongest interests are tracking information. And so you look at the combinations, you'll have hundreds of jobs, you'll have hundreds of careers and many, many thousands of jobs that you can read about. And then you can, what I would suggest you do that, if you don't have enough information at that point, and you probably won't, do some informational interviews. Talk to people who may be in that position and find out what's it like for them, what do they like about it, and is it something that seems to be in alignment with the way you came out in this interest inventory.
And also I'll mention on the PSG of Mercer County website, there's a menu item called resources. In there is a link already to ONET, and to the different state resources, including New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, and Delaware. So you can check there as well. Pat has a question. What exactly is a career inventory? And if that's a separate presentation.
Yeah, that's a whole
keep it a little shorter. Yeah, summarize.
And then I painted the garage, and you will have almost every assessment that you could possibly want to do a career inventory. It's looking at your strengths. It's looking at what your interests are, what your accomplishments are, what your skills are and how they're transferable, what your values are, what motivates you, getting into more depth. I use the caliper profile when I help companies with their hiring and sometimes with career development. So it looks at all the personality attributes that you have, and then we compare the personality attributes to the personalities. So it's different than interests. It's much more behavioral science. I hope that answers it. I mean, it's a lot of things.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yep, let's move on.
Okay. So COVID, I don't know what percentage of the people in your group have been displaced because of COVID. 40 million people in the United States have been so far. Some of them have been called back. Some of you will be called back. Some of you won't. Initially, I had a number of people from ETS that contacted me who said, well, I'm on furlough. I'm not sure how this is going to work. And some of them have been told they're not being called back. So COVID has disrupted our lives. We all know that. This is a time to reflect. If you were put into a position where you couldn't go to work right now in the job you have, it may be time to consider what have you been doing and how much satisfaction has there been. It could be a great time to change jobs and find something which is a better fit for you. It's a good time to gain new skills. Sitting in front of the computer, I don't ever recommend anybody, stare at Indeed all day, filling out applications. That's a real low return on investment. So I would be looking at other possibilities of how to spend your time. One is developing yourself. Another one is searching using online networking at this point. Not a lot of people are meeting you for lunch anymore, but you need to have the skills to look online. You want to make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date. You have time. If you're not working, you have time to do that. Talk to people. The thing, when I work with people's profiles to make them stronger, the homework for your LinkedIn profile is basically the same homework for your resume. The one real difference that I see, other than you have more space so you can put more information in the profile, is your headline. And I can tell you that since I get, at this point, the majority of my clients who are individuals who are looking for a new position from LinkedIn, I get to see their headlines. And some of them, you don't have to cut this out, they suck. I mean, I look at these headlines and then I talk to the people, and there is so little connection between what they put down, or it's so vague that, or it's so grandiose that if I was looking as a recruiter through LinkedIn to hire people, I look at these headlines and going, well, skip that one, skip that one. The headline has to be well thought out and needs to be right to the point. It needs to be positive, and it needs not to have every keyword you've ever thought of in the headline, because that's just confusing to people. So that's one of the things you can do at this point. You have time, talk to people, get their feedback, show it to people before you stick with it and see, does that make sense to you? And have them look at your LinkedIn profile. I mean, the last I heard, there are almost 600 million people on LinkedIn around the world. So that's something that, we're stuck with right now. If you like it or not, might as well make the best of it. Time to increase your informational interviews. They're now all online, so just remember people have limited amount of time, and if you're polite, the nicer you are about asking, the more you can get from somebody, the more likely it is they're going to help you. And make sure people, Michelle Obama, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, on a podcast, talked about that she was depressed. And I think it was an incredible thing that she was willing to do that. She was saying that everybody is affected by COVID. If you're working or not working, there's this dark cloud that's hanging above us from COVID and the racial strife that we have in our country and dislocation and the political stress of people not wanting to talk to somebody who's in the other party. There's a lot going on in our country, and now we have hurricanes that are demolishing Louisiana. It's time to get support. I tell people that they should create small groups of support. PSG does it, but I would get 4 or 5 people that you can always rely on. You can talk to them, get their feedback, because it's a lot easier to go through a stressful time when you know that you're not the only person going through it, and there are people who will be there to take your back. Questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay, this is already out of date. I did this last week, and it's out of date because we've had another week where 1 million people applied for unemployment. And the figure that I've come up with more than once was the worst week we ever had was 685,000 people in 1982. So we've now beaten that, I think, 21 times in the last 22 weeks. With all the dislocation, you can see the statistics here. Our unemployment rate has bounced up and down. Nobody really knows what's going on. I read articles from the Fed all the time, other economists. They pretty much agree we don't know what's going to happen. Politicians will say they know, but the people who seem to be expert don't. If we get control of the virus, the sooner we do it, the better our economy will be, the more people will be rehired. But some of this dislocation is going to be permanent. And just like in 2007 and 2008, we need to be flexible enough so that when we're looking for work at this point, we're looking for work in an occupation where they're actually hiring. And we need to be prepared to communicate our value to these new positions. If it's a big change or a small change, we have to be proactive about this. So the book is not finished yet. The book is different than my first book, and that the first book was, okay, this is what you need to do to get a job. Pivot is more about stories about people who have made a change, and I've taken some theory and some assessment and matched it to these stories. So I've lots of examples of people who have gone from one occupation or one industry to another, and how they did it and what motivated them. And there are some similarities. All of them have been able to reframe their backgrounds. All of them are flexible enough to say, well, because I did something in the past doesn't mean I have to keep doing the same thing in the present and in the future. So the book is going to touch on personality attributes that make it easier to pivot. It's going to look at history lessons from people who've been able to pivot with lots of step-by-step situations, and how the interviews that I've been doing, I've tried to keep it in the person's own words, so that rather than me interpreting everything, it's their story, and then I comment on it. So it's very different than the first book. It's really much more their stories. And I think it's been a fun thing for me to do to be interviewing these people. So the slide that's up is part of my general job choice workshops. People need to make sure that they understand that they have control over what they do, what they think about things. They need to not be passive about things. The more proactive you can be, the more you understand that you can release yourself from the past to some degree. You can look at how do you want to define yourself in the present. I have worked with a lot of people who have made major pivots, having been in jail, and sometimes federal jails, sometimes local jails. So I've seen people who have made these big changes. They have let go of the negatives from their past. Sometimes people have done bad things, and rather than have that haunt them for the rest of their lives, they look at, well, what do I have to offer, and how can I explain myself in a way so that people will give me a chance? And when you pivot, that's what you're doing. You're asking people to give you a chance based on what you can come up with as a good argument why you fit their needs. So part of that is this openness to making new choices. And many people just aren't that flexible. They're just not going to be able to do that. Not that they should. Many occupations are fine. You just move up one level, or you find another company and they pay you about the same or slightly more than you used to be making. And, people are going to do that. But we do know that at this point, if you graduate from high school, you are going to probably have at least 3 or 4 different careers in your lifetime. And you're probably going to have more than 10 or 11 jobs. So the idea that you're going to change, even if it's not foremost in your mind, it's probably going to happen. And so this comes straight from my stress workshop. And I think it's appropriate for everybody who's going through any transition. It's not the world that makes your decisions. You have a set of beliefs. Because of your beliefs, when you take actions, there are going to be consequences. The consequences come back, and they may or may not affect your beliefs, and this becomes a loop. So if you're successful and you believe in yourself, then whatever you try to do and work will have a better outcome than if you tell yourself, well, this is never going to work, or I'm too old, or they're not going to hire a woman, or they're not going to hire a man, or they're not going to hire somebody of this ethnic background. The more you believe in yourself, and see, if you're aware of this, the more aware you are of your positive and negative feedback, the more likely it is that you get control over it. And you can see that the consequences you receive from your actions may be more based on your beliefs than anything else. So if you believe that no one will ever hire you because you're 50, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe that at the age of 50, you have a lot to offer and you've put the effort into showing how you can contribute and what your value is and that you will fit, then it's much more likely you'll get the job you really want. Now, I believe age discrimination takes place, but it takes place later than it did. There was an organization that was based on if you were over 40 and worked in a corporation, then you're going to have big problems. I don't think that's the case anymore. I do believe that if I were to apply for a job today, there are very few positions that might be available to somebody who's 72 years old. But that doesn't mean I couldn't get a job. And I do practice interviews just to prove to myself that what I teach other people works. And I had a job offer last week, and they know how old I am. So I guess I was able to say, What you're looking for, I can give you, and maybe even more than that. So this is some of the research that has come out from a variety of sources, and this is my experience. The more optimistic you can be, the better off you will be as far as your job search. The more rational you can be. You need to really look at the experiences that you have and judge yourself in a fair, equitable way. Some of the things that take place in the job search don't make any sense. I have a section, and then I pinned to the garage about the irrational parts of the job search. But you need to be rational, and you need to be looking at win-win solutions. The more you can get other people involved in helping you, the more you can help other people. The faster your job search goes, the better the match will be when you end up with your new position. You need to learn from your experiences. What pays off in your job search? What seems to be a dead end every time you do it? But self-fulfilling prophecies are very apparent in the quick outcomes. There's something in my books, one of the people I asked to make a comment about it said, when you got a problem, call Larry. And I thought that was an incredibly sweet thing for this person to say, because she said, if you believe that he can help you, then he will help you. And so I think with some of my clients, when they talk to me, they said, oh, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not that I'm doing anything miraculous, but I'm using my experience and the experience of thousands of people that say that if you do the following things and you believe in yourself, you're more likely to have a good outcome. You're more likely to get the job you want. You're more likely to make it happen sooner. And I think that's where we should stop with this. So, questions?
Yes, Christopher has a question. How can I/we get remotivated? How can we combat these prophecies?
Well, one is to examine what the prophecies are and to say, is this rational? I mean, if you get depressed, what generally happens is you go into a negative feedback loop. You're giving yourself a message that things aren't going to work out. I feel blocked. Nobody loves me. Nobody appreciates me. And what you need to do, and sometimes other people helping you with this is significant, is to break down these statements that you're making to yourself and say, are these true or are these opinions? Because most of the attitudes that you'll have are based on opinions. They're not facts. Now, I know in this world of crazy politics, facts are hard to come by at times. That people think, oh, well, this is the way it is, and it's only somebody's opinion. We know how many people have died from COVID in general, but there are all sorts of opinions as to why. If you are feeling bad about yourself, then you need to look at, why do you feel this, and is it really accurate? And if you look for accuracy and you get the feedback of people who understand who you are and appreciate you, you can make a lot of corrections to the negative self-statements. Also, you look at your accomplishments. I've worked with special needs young adults at the College of New Jersey. They have a special program there. Kids, young adults who all had cognitive difficulties. None of them had an IQ over 85, autism, Down syndrome. They all had accomplishments. I would sit with them and we'd look at, and we could come up with examples of where they had done something that was helpful to somebody else and they could own it. And those are extreme cases. I've worked with people who are on welfare for years. I've worked with people getting out of prisons. If people who have all those challenges can sit down and come up with accomplishments. Those of us who maybe didn't have to deal with such extremes can certainly come up with it. I tell people, did you do 2 valuable things a year at work? And write them down. And if you write them down and you worked for 20 years, you should have 40 accomplishments. And most people have a lot more once they get into the habit of writing them down. That will change how you feel about yourself when you see what you've actually done that made a difference. Period. Any other questions?
Not right now.
So I guess this is where you go into your networking program?
Oh, is this the last slide?
Yeah, well, it's not the last slide, but I mean, like I said, I could go on and on and on, and it then becomes.
Well, you know, I would think, or what I saw, I believe, you do have your contact information slide. So at the very least, yeah, do put that up. And yeah, we'll also be available for extra questions right now. So Joanne has a question. We'll just wait for that last slide to come up.
Okay, that's the book.
Yep. So this book is available now. If you're interested, you can contact Larry about that, or I believe it is on Amazon as well.
On Amazon, yeah.
Okay. And
anybody, you know, my phone number is available up there. Email is available if you want to talk to me.
Okay. And let's just quickly see. Very good. Terrific. So let me just look at the extra questions that are coming through, the end of program questions. So from Joanne, could you offer suggestions on how to address the concerns of, and in parentheses, stress, of family members, namely a spouse, while job hunting and career pivoting?
Often when you're in the middle of a job search or almost any stressful situation, you're more aware of what's going on than the people around you. And when they love you, it's very stressful because they don't have information. And often they imagine things that are worse than are actually going on. I once worked with an outplacement situation where, and I've always invited people to bring their family members into at least one meeting so they would understand what it is that we were trying to accomplish and how we were going to do it. And I had a client who came in with his wife and his 7-year-old, and his 7-year-old actually asked, does this mean I won't be able to go to college because daddy lost his job? Well, we quickly fixed that problem. But I often find people, when they bring in their spouse, the spouse is confused because secrets have been kept. Extreme case, somebody lost their job and their wife didn't know it for 4 months because every day they'd go leave the house, they'd go to a coffee shop and conduct a job search from there and never told, and they handled the paycheck that went into the bank and they covered up for themselves because they wanted to protect their spouse from the idea that they had lost their job, in which case it didn't work because she thought he was going to divorce her because of his odd behavior. But sharing information is the answer. Share as much information about what's going on till the other person doesn't want to hear it anymore. And a spouse or any significant person in your life can be helpful in your job search. You don't know every person that person knows. And I have had so many situations where networking through people you would have predicted could have been helpful have helped. I ran a group years ago where I think we had 30 people in the room, 15 couples, and we talked about networking. And one of the things I said was, well, have you all networked with your, in this case, I think 90% of the clients were male, and did you talk to your wife? Well, no, and the wives would say, well, I don't know anybody. And in every case, when we did role playing, there was a good lead that came about from the person that you didn't expect would know anybody. So sharing information, getting information, remembering that you're, a family or a close relationship of some sort makes this go much more smoothly.
This is such an important topic. I know a while ago at the PSG group, we had life coach Tamara Causley Robinson talked on that very topic, a whole presentation. The career support group in Hamilton did that just last week or the week before. John Hadley talks about it as well, career coach John Hadley. Very important topic, so I'm glad you touched on it and asked that question.
Yeah, well, I'm a family therapist too, so.
Terrific. We have another question from S. Davi. Can you explain more on the beliefs and how to change beliefs? What steps to take?
Well, the first thing is to become aware of what the belief is. And most people go through life without examining what they believe or why they believe it. And so the first step really is, you can use examples in my book that are to break this down, but in detail. But what you basically want to do is, what are the assumptions you make about any situation? What do you assume about yourself and how people perceive you? Get feedback from people. There is a simple, it's not really an assessment, it's simply you go to different people who know you and ask, can you please give me the one word which you think best describes me? And then ask them for an example of why they use that word. Well, that way you gather more information about how people really do perceive you, which can help you differentiate between your belief about yourself and how other people believe you are, which can give you some, it's like doing a 360 when you're in a company, so that you get feedback from a lot of different sources. The belief being that the more sources you get that are independent, the more likely it is you'll get an accurate output. So ask the people around you, how do they perceive you? When you have a negative belief, ask yourself, why do you have that belief? Is it because of something that's factual or an opinion? Has the opinion changed because of circumstance? Are you a less valuable human being because you're not working at the moment? The answer is no. One of the problems that some people have is that they identify so much with their job that they forget about all the other aspects of who they are as a human being. So, you're a family member and probably have many different roles, and you're a friend and you're a member of the community. And so getting this positive feedback will help correct some of the negative thoughts that you may have. In any extreme case, and I don't know people's circumstances in the group at this moment, if you find that there are recurring thoughts that are very negative and they're getting you stuck, you should consider talking to a professional about it. Sometimes a brief interaction with somebody who you see as objective can get you unstuck.
Yeah, that's a very important point. One thing that we added not long ago to the PSG of Mercer County resource website, in that same resources page, is a link to the Mental Health Association in New Jersey. And so if you want any information, if you're curious, you can even contact them anonymously. So just look at the PSG of Mercer County website. There's a page called resources, and we have 2 personal resources and then a bunch of professional resources. So
yeah, you have a lot. I consult the Carrier Clinic and I consult the Princeton House. And there are a few others like Trinity Counseling. So you have a lot of places that are close by in Princeton and Hamilton and private groups that there shouldn't be a difficulty in finding professional help. You may want somebody who's individual, you may want somebody of your same gender, you may want somebody of your same age. You're going to have those choices. Remember, you're the client, so you make some of those calls.
Sherry has a request in her question. Please feel free to explain the title of your book, and then I painted the garage. It would be a great teaser. So I guess what's the motivation behind the title?
And then I painted the garage came about because I had a client about 30 years ago. It was an outplacement client, so he wasn't paying for the coaching, and he missed the first 3 appointments that I set up with him. And I was getting frustrated with this because I was wasting my time with him not showing up. Finally, he showed up for the 4th one, and I said, my first question was, "Are you independently wealthy?" And he said, "No." I said, "So you've lost, based on your salary, you've lost, $10,000-$12,000 by not showing up, delaying your job search. What were you doing?" And he told me there were all these things that he was doing around the house, and some of them seemed like, okay, it's legitimate, and some of them seemed sort of vague and inconsequential. And I said, "And then what? And then what?" And he kept coming up with all these things. And finally he said, "Well, then I painted the garage." And I said, "Let me guess, it was cinder block, it was the inside of the garage, and it didn't really need it, did it? You were just avoiding doing this." So the title is really, part of the book is about how do you stay motivated in a job search when you're going through stress and you're dealing with rejection until you take a job. So it's a lot about motivation and getting through that difficult time.
Yeah, that's a very nice story. So I just want to take this opportunity, Larry, once again to say thank you so much for being a part of the PSG Mercer County group and being a supporter of us. We're certainly very appreciative you were able to present today. The chat has a number of people that are thanking you as well for the program. So
and it was so much easier to park this time.
Yeah. So yeah, as we get ready to wrap up, we'll have the open networking in just a minute. But I really thought this topic was just so relevant. Consider that for you, a pivot may be time to consider. If you're not getting calls from recruiters, if you're not getting those interviews, you get that first interview but not moving beyond it, or maybe you just don't want to do what you used to do. It may be time to think as objectively as possible to see if you can pivot. And so I thought this is not unusual at all for people to be in this situation. So this is just extremely helpful and relevant and perfect timing right now. And as I mentioned a little earlier, Larry did mention ONET, the New Jersey Career Navigator, and other resources. The PSG of Mercer County website on the resources page does have a link for ONET. We've had it there for a while, as well as New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, and Delaware state resources. So you can go take a look at that page of the website. There's lots of other resources as well, but just wanted to make the direct connection to the points that Larry made a little bit earlier. And let you know what's coming up. Next week, we will be right back here, virtually online. Hopefully you can join us. Absolutely, Abby will absolutely be here. Abby Kohut is back on the circuit, and I'm so glad that we're able to have her present next week. Your 2020 career, becoming a victor rather than a victim. Just sounds like a wonderful program. Abby is always a delight, extremely relevant. She's both from the HR perspective and the job search support perspective. So absolutely, Abby will be here September 4th, which is next Friday. The following Friday is September 11th. Jeff Altman will be here. He is also a career coach, the big game hunter. He will help you achieve your objectives by hunting down leaders and staff that you need to be in touch with. So please, if you have the opportunity to come visit us over the next 2 weeks, please do so. You can check our website's event calendar. Our event calendar is populated through October, maybe the beginning of November by now. So take a look at the programs and the topics and presenters that are coming up. There may be a topic or person that you absolutely don't want to miss. So put that event on your event calendar as well. Other groups and meetings that are coming up. Sundays, George Pace has his live webinars on Facebook. And so those are always helpful. The recorded ones are available too. It's facebook.com/keeppace, facebook.com/keeppace. That's keep pace, all one word, but 2 P's, keep pace with 2 P's. Also on Mondays, PSG of Central New Jersey meets virtually. You can check their website, psgcnj.biz. They meet Monday at 10:30. Cynthia Medina Carson will be presenting Negotiating the Offer. So as you get down through the process of job search and interviewing, you will want to know the proper way to address that as well. And then also PSG of Morris County meets every Wednesday at 9 a.m. and you can visit their website, psgmc.org. And New Jersey Job Seekers, the oldest continuously running job seeker support group. They meet Tuesdays at 7:30. And what's nice about that, it's a slightly different format. It's not a webinar, it's a virtual group meeting. And you can find the connection information on the PSG of Mercer County LinkedIn group. This week they are using Zoom, and so you can get the Zoom connection information on the PSG of Mercer County LinkedIn group. So that's all the news that we have. So once again, just want to say thank you very much, Larry. This was a wonderful, delightful presentation, and of course, very relevant. Again, thank you for being a supporter. And yep, there's some virtual applause going on. That's kind of nice. And just want to thank everybody for participating. Glad you were able to join us. And we hope to see you virtually next week. Bye, everybody. Have a good Aloha Friday.